topics and opinions expressed in the following show are solely those of the host and their guests and not those of W4CY Radio, its employees, or affiliates. We make no recommendations or endorsements for radio show programs, services, or products mentioned on air or on our web. No liability, explicit or implied, shall be extended to W4CY Radio or its employees or affiliates. Any questions or comments should be directed to those show hosts. Thank you for choosing W4CY Radio.
What's working on purpose anyway? Each week, we ponder the answer to this question. People ache for meaning and purpose at work, to contribute their talents passionately and know their lives really matter. They crave being part of an organization that inspires them and helps them grow into realizing their highest potential. Business can be such a force for good in the world, elevating humanity. In our program, we provide guidance and inspiration to help usher in this world we all want, working on purpose. Now, here's your host, Dr. Alise Cortez.
Welcome back to the Working on Purpose program, which has been brought to you with passion and pride since February of 2015. Thanks for tuning in again this week. Great to have you. I'm your host, Dr. Alise Cortez. If we have not met before and you don't know me, I'm a workforce advisor, organizational psychologist, management consultant, logotherapist, speaker, and author. My team and I at Gusto Now help companies enliven and fortify their operations by building a dynamic, high-performance culture, inspirational leadership, and nurturing managers activated by meaning and purpose. And did you know that inspired employees in purpose-led companies outperform their satisfied peers by a factor of 2.25 to 1? In other words, inspiration is good for the bottom line. You can learn more about us and how we can work together at gusto-now.com and my personal site, alisecortez.com. Getting into today's program, we have with us Rich Diviney. He is a retired Navy SEAL commander. In a career spanning more than 20 years, he completed more than 13 overseas deployments, 11 of which were to Iraq and Afghanistan, and served as the officer in charge of selection, assessment, and training for a specialized SEAL command. Since 2017, he has taught classes and delivered keynote speeches about leadership, optimal performance, and high-performing teams to thousands of businesses, athletic military leaders, and to many well-known organizations. He is also the author of The Attributes, 25 Hidden Drivers of Optimal Performance, and the latest we're focused on today is called Masters of Uncertainty, the Navy SEAL Way to Turn Stress into Success for You and Your Team. We'll be discussing in particular his Master Uncertainty method any of us can use to elevate our performance, as well as how it can be applied in teams. Rich joins us today from Virginia Beach, Virginia. Rich, a very hearty welcome to Working on Purpose.
Oh, thank you, Alise. It's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
I am delighted to know you, sir. Some kind of a command here, but I really, really admire and I'm inspired by who you are and how you've navigated your life. So let me just start with that.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. It's an honor to be here, and it's an honor to be able to share some of the experiences and lessons I learned through that very kinetic career.
That's a great word for it, I would say. Yes. Well, I want to first start by saying, wow, have you written the timely book? I personally, I've been around for a few decades. I don't remember more uncertain times than we are in today. So did you have some kind of premonition here, or this just works across all kinds of life? How'd this happen?
Yeah, I have to say, well, I agree with you where it seems like we're more rife with uncertainty than ever before. I will say that it didn't matter to me when the book came out. And if there's any certainty in life, it's that uncertainty will strike. And to be prepared for it and to be ready to move through it, and in some cases thrive in it, is in fact, I think, the element of true confidence. And that's what I hope to endow upon people, is the ability to be really, truly confident.
I really appreciate the whole premise and promise of your book. That's what you're saying, is you're saying what some of these things I like to be able to put your actual words in this, but what you said is Navy SEALs and other high achievers, anyone who is adept at any circumstances, are fundamentally similar to everyone else. Their edge is simply that they harness innate yet often overlooked capabilities that we all possess. That is so encouraging. And I love the idea of that. It's a matter of finding it and then somehow unleashing it and harnessing it.
Well, it's funny. I began thinking about this stuff even when I first graduated SEAL training. I mean, in Navy SEAL training, it's a very, very tough process. There's about an 85 to 90% attrition rate. So only about 10 to 15% of the guys who start make it through. And I remember making it through and that graduation feeling what I call kind of a healthy imposter syndrome, because I'd look around and say, how am I still here with these guys around me, and I kind of, I say healthy because it really pushed me. It didn't make me feel insecure. It just pushed me to really do better, be better, and do right by my teammates. But ironically, what was interesting is as I got to know my teammates, I realized that they had the same imposter syndrome going on. They were like, how am I still here too? So it began to dawn on me that these kind of innate things, or things that we took as being innate, were not exclusive to Navy SEALs. They were in fact human. And as I began to dig into the elements and the neuroscience specifically, I recognized that, hey, this is human stuff. It's not just Navy SEAL stuff. And once you realize that, you can talk about it, you can teach it, you can help others.
Yeah, and what I want to also celebrate, which is what we're going to really spend time in the third segment, is really focusing on how do we use this stuff in the teams world and in organizations. But one thing I did want to celebrate what you just said there is the power of associating with other people that are also stretching themselves and going beyond what they think they can do is so powerful. Choosing that kind of company. Yeah,
I totally agree. Yeah, we really, the adage that we are who we surround ourselves with is very, very true. And I found that, and that goes for environments as well. I mean, environments matter, and they will shape people. And I got the analogy my good friend uses is if you take the best cucumber in the world and put it in a pickle jar, it will turn into a pickle. So it might be if the brine is bad, it'll be a bad pickle too. So environment matters, and the people you surround yourself with matters.
So I want to give that directly to our listeners and viewers. So listeners and viewers, ladies and gentlemen, if you are in a place where you're not really shining, I would check your teammates. I would check who are you surrounded by. Is this the right place for you? Maybe you need a place where you can shine higher or better. This isn't the right group for you. I just would tell you to listen very closely to what Rich is saying about opting into and being mindful of who you associate with. So I want to just bake that in. It's so important.
Yeah.
All right, well, let's talk about your mastering uncertainty method. It's so elegant, 6 aspects to it, and so straightforward, but so powerful. So if you can kind of give us the overview of what they are and how they hang together.
Yeah, so it's kind of 6 main elements, and the first 3 have to do with the neurology, neuroscience, and physiology of human beings. And the second, in other words, it's ubiquitous to everybody. Everybody can do it. And the second 3 have to do with what we uniquely bring into uncertainty. And so the first 3 are, it's this concept of moving horizons, which I know we'll get into. How do we actually apply and manage uncertainty in our environment? The second involves how do we keep going? So how do we keep doing it? And the third implies how do we maintain a level of not only calm, but focus and cognition during the process. One of the things I know we'll get into is when we start to feel uncertainty and anxiety and that fear, neurologically some very interesting things happen. And a lot of times our frontal lobe, our decision-making part of our brain, starts to take a back seat. And so the idea is keep that engaged so we can, in fact, manage ourselves. And then the second 3 are really about what we uniquely bring into uncertainty. One is our objectives. What are the goals? What are the outcomes that we hope to achieve that drives our performance? The second is attributes, which again, I wrote my first book on, is a huge topic, but what are those qualities about us that are unique, and the order of the qualities are unique, and that starts to speak to our performance. And then identities, what are those IMs that we bring into an environment? Because those drive our behaviors, both consciously and unconsciously. So those are some things we learn uniquely about ourselves.
It's such a powerful model that you created. And of course, that last bit, those last 3, I've been an identity and meaning and work researcher for years. And so when you talk about identity driving your behavior, I'm like, yeah, I understand that down to my last toenail.
Yeah.
I do want to talk about each of these areas in a little bit more in depth, but I wanted to first let our listeners and viewers hear a little bit about how the model hangs together. So let's talk first about moving horizons. I really thought that this notion of you've situated and introduced stress in a different way. You've told us that, the stress response is designed to, by nature, to get us up and moving. And therefore it's an asset if we use it as such. And stress gets a really, really bad rap.
Yeah.
If you could say a little bit more about moving horizons.
Yeah. So moving horizons has to do with how we, in fact, manage ourselves. So just to rewind just a bit, when we talk about uncertainty, we're talking about actually a very specific type of uncertainty, because we're really talking about the uncertainty that elicits fear. Fear is really the factor that holds us back in performance. That's what it does. Now, I know you and I talked briefly before we started about my buddy Andrew Huberman, who wrote The Forward. Andrew he still is a neuroscientist. He has a great podcast. He was studying fear in his lab at Stanford, and we were doing a lot of this work together. And one of the things we hypothesized was that fear is in fact a combination of two distinct factors, and those factors are uncertainty plus anxiety. So in other words, if you only have one but not the other, you don't necessarily have fear. You can be anxious but not uncertain. That's like maybe you have to give a presentation next week at work. You know the presentation, you know the people. There's no real uncertainty there, but there's some anxiety. So there's fear, just anxiety. You can be uncertain without being anxious. Well, that's every kid on Christmas Eve, and we know there's no fear there, right? So it's when you combine the two that you get fear, and this is the type of uncertainty we're looking at. Is that uncertainty plus anxiety? So moving horizons is part of the process, the procedure for buying down fear. The way you buy down fear is you buy down one or both of those factors. You buy down uncertainty and or anxiety. Moving horizons helps you buy down uncertainty by allowing you to focus on an element in your control in the moment. And so one of the things we have to understand about our brains is trying to figure out an environment and create certainty around an environment at all times. And it's doing so kind of along three major factors. Those factors are duration, how long is this going to last? Pathway, my route in, out, or through, and then outcome. What's the end state? If we are in absence of one or more of those, we start to feel uncertainty and therefore anxiety and fear. A real great example would be illness. You and I, we all know strep throat. Okay, it's an illness. We all know most people don't die from strep throat. There's an antibiotic that can cure strep throat. If we get strep throat, we are in absence of only one of the three because we know the pathway, antibiotic. We know the outcome. We're going to get better. What we don't know is the duration. We don't know exactly how long it's going to take. Anxiety, uncertainty level is mild. Now let's talk about the flu, which is also a known illness. Most people don't die from the flu, but there's no known cure for the flu. A lot of people have crazy ideas, but there's no codified cure for the flu. So if we have the flu, we are in absence of now two, pathway and duration. We know the outcome will get better. We just don't know how long, don't know how we're going to do it. Now let's imagine a disease shows up on the planet and we've never seen it before. There's no known cure or vaccine. Some people are dying, some people are not dying, and we don't know how long it's going to spread across the globe. Well, 2020 is probably sounding familiar right now. That's how we all felt. We were absence of all three. All Moving Horizons does is it allows you to ground yourself in something you can control. You ask yourself, what do I know? What can I control? And in essence, by picking a horizon, you create your own DPO, duration, pathway, outcome. A real quick example is Navy SEAL training, where you run around all the time with these big heavy boats on your head. And I remember we were doing this. It was like 3 a.m. We've been running with these boats forever. We were on the beach. We were all miserable, and we were next to a sand berm as we're running. And I remember saying to myself, I said, you know what? I'm just going to focus on getting to the end of this sand berm. And what I did in that moment was inadvertently, unbeknownst to me, picked a horizon and created a DPO, duration from now until end of sand berm, pathway from here to end of sand berm, and outcome end of sand berm. And then created and manipulated my own reward system, dopamine system, which we can get into in the keep going section, that allowed me to create a reward. And then when I hit that goal, I just did it again. I picked another horizon. So all Moving Horizons is asking yourself constantly, what do I know? What can I control? Picking something to focus on, moving to it, coming back out, picking the next thing to focus on, moving to that, coming back out. And you can do this over and over again until one of three things happens. Either you make it through the challenge and stress. 2, you achieve the goal, you accomplish the goal. Or 3, you generate enough certainty in your environment that you no longer need to do it. But it works. And it's how actually every single human being has a story of having done this. We just probably didn't know what we were doing, but we do this all the time, and we can do it in any time in uncertainty, challenge, and stress.
2 things in response to that. First, I love what this whole process even is, just that, the process of teaching, bringing this stuff to an awareness, a consciousness, is what allows us to be able to activate and do something with it. Now we're aware that we can actually do this, or maybe that we have been doing it. So that strengthens our capacity. Love that. And second, I just got to celebrate. I knew before I even met you, having read your book, heard about your past and what you've done with your life, that you were going to be you were going to be crisp, you were going to be direct, you were going to speak fast. And here it is. It's great, which is why I crafted more questions than I normally do for my
Right. Yes. Yeah.
Okay. So now we have to really geek out on this really fun phrase that you put in the book that I just could not resist. And it's the concept of actualizing neurology.
Yeah.
Let's talk about that.
Yeah. Well, actionalizing your neurology means we're going to use our brains in a very proactive, positive way. And one of the first ways we do that is to understand that, again, like we said, when fear starts to enter our system, our autonomic arousal goes up, our amygdala gets tickled, and our frontal lobe, the decision-making part of our brain, begins to recede. The limbic part of our brain begins to take over. Now, in the extreme cases, this is autonomic overload or amygdala hijack, where our frontal lobe has taken a full back seat. Our limbic brain is now forward. We are acting without thinking. Okay, now this comes in very handy when we're jumping out of a way of a moving train or running from the bear, but it doesn't come in handy in about 99% of other things that happen where we actually want to have some agency in our decision-making process. So actualizing neurology means we're going to do things that bring that frontal lobe back online and allow us to, in fact, use the decision-making part of our brain. We can do this through, and we can talk about buying down anxiety. There's some ways we can do that through visual tools or breath work. One of the best ways to do this is just asking the right types of questions. What we have to understand is our brains are question answering machines, because again, like we said, our brains want certainty in our environment. So we're constantly interrogating our environment through questions, a lot of times unconsciously. But what we don't realize is when we take conscious control of this thing, if we place a question into our frontal lobe deliberately, our brain has no choice but to begin to come up with answers. Now, the problem is a lot of times we do this without thinking, but we do it the wrong way. We say things like, why am I so bad at this? Or why does this always happen to me? Or why are these people out to get me? Okay. Or why am I pissed off? Okay. If you ask yourself why you're pissed off, you will get some spectacular answers as to why you're pissed off. Okay. Because your brain will answer the question. What every high-performing person, high-performing team does, and everybody I've met, is we take conscious control of the questions we ask ourselves, and we ask better ones. We say things like, who's out there that can help me? What am I good at? In the moving horizons case, what do I know? What can I control? And you get better answers. This is a literal way to focus our thoughts, focus our brain positively, because where our focus goes, where our focus is where we go, both mentally and physically. By the way, physically this works because I did a bunch of driving schools when I was a SEAL. We have to learn how to drive a bunch of different vehicles. So we go to racing schools, and I love everything about driving, so I volunteer for everyone. Every time you go to a racing school, the first thing they teach you is you get in the car and they say, I'm going to teach you how to get out of a spin if your car gets out of control. First rule when you get into a spin is do not look at the wall. Because if you look at the wall, you're going to crash in the wall. Yeah. The car might be pointed at the wall, but you have to look to where you want to go, and your body will start to follow. The mind does the same thing. So actualizing your neurology and asking better questions is simply a way to focus your brain on the better result and get better answers.
Such a sexy phrase, and it just sounds so incredibly important and enlivening and elevating. Let's do more about this actualizing neurology, but let's grab our first break. I'm your host, Dr. Alise Cortez. We've been on the air with Rich Diviney. He's the founder of The Attributes. We've been talking a bit about where these ideas of his came from, how he's used them in his own life, going through his model. After the break, we're going to continue the conversation about his model and really get into how we can utilize our body's own natural performance generator. We'll be right back.
Dr. Alise Cortez is a management consultant specializing in meaning and purpose, an inspirational speaker and author. She helps companies visioneer for greater purpose among stakeholders and develop purpose-inspired leadership and meaning-infused cultures that elevate fulfillment, performance, and commitment within the workforce. To learn more or to invite Alise to speak to your organization, please visit her at alisecortez.com. Let's talk about how to get your employees working on purpose. This is Working on Purpose with Dr. Alise Cortez. To reach our program today or to open a conversation with Alise, send an email to Alise, A-L-I-S-E, at alisecortez.com. Now, back to Working on Purpose.
Thanks for staying with us and welcome back to Working on Purpose. I'm your host, Dr. Alise Cortez, as I am dedicated to helping create a world where organizations thrive because their people thrive, and they're led by inspirational leaders that help them find and contribute their greatness, and we do business that betters the world. I keep researching and writing my own books. So one of my latest came out. It's called The Great Revitalization: How Activating Meaning and Purpose Can Radically Enliven Your Business. And I wrote that for leaders to help them understand today's very discerning workforce. What do they want to be able to give their best to you and want to stick around? And then I offer 22 best practices to equip your organization to provide that for them. You can find my books on Amazon or my personal site, alisecortez.com. If you are just now joining us, my guest is Rich Diviney. He's the author of Masters of Uncertainty, the Navy SEAL Way to Turn Stress into Success for You and Your Team. So one of the things that delights me, I should say a core thread of what delights me about your book and what you've done here is you've really taught us, you're teaching us how to really get clear about how our brain does work, and then really intervening in that in a way that we can sort of command it and really get it working for us instead of against us. And I just really want to celebrate that. And all the way down to this fun idea of how we can manipulate dopamine in our favor. Let's talk a little bit about how that relates to your body's performance generator.
Yeah, well, dopamine is it's an oft talked about neurotransmitter, and actually formerly always known as a reward chemical, but in fact we now know it's a motivation chemical. They've done experiments with dopamine in mice, and they've realized that if with no dopamine, a mouse won't even get up to get food if they're hungry. And so dopamine is actually what gets us up and moving in the morning. So we all have different dopamine levels, and we all have different things that initiate dopamine in our system. One of the reasons why this is important is because when we execute the moving horizons process, what we're doing is we're actually deliberately manipulating our dopamine system. And the reason is because we're picking a goal that actually is just outside our reach of comfort, but not too far. And it motivates us. We're giving us a burst to get us there. Now, the reason why this process, moving horizon process, is very subjective to the individual and to the intensity of the environment is because the dopamine register is going to work in very individualistic ways. So in other words, the more intense the environment, the shorter that horizon often has to be. In SEAL training, they make you sit in the surf zone and freeze for what seems like hours. The water out there in Southern California is really cold. I don't know anybody who's listening who knows Southern California water will agree with me. It's not tropical at all. Most people, in fact, quit SEAL training because of the cold, not because of the physical stuff. But anyway, they keep you in the surf zone for hours, it seems. And I remember being in the surf zone a couple times, freezing, and my horizon was count 5 waves. It was that small. Sometimes my horizon was, make it to the next meal. Sometimes it was make it to the end of the sand berm. But what I was doing is I'm picking a horizon that allows me to have the proper amount of dopamine to get to that goal, and then you also get a dopamine reward for hitting that goal. So it's kind of a double whammy there in a positive way. The good news is we can modulate these distances. If you pick a horizon that's too far, too big, you will run out of dopamine before you get there. All right. Anytime we quit anything, it's because we've run out of dopamine. That's why we quit. If we pick a horizon that's too short, then we're not going to register a dopamine reward at all. It's not going to feel anything. It's going to be, well, that was too short. But the good news is we can manipulate that. We can adjust along the way. So you can pick a horizon, and as you're going, you feel like, oh, wait, that's too long. You can pull that horizon back in. You can short it. If you pick one that's too short, you'll feel that right away. You'll just pick something longer. But just know that for every individual, it's subjective, and it's really about taking those small chunks. This is the neurological equivalent of eating the elephant one bite at a time.
Yeah.
So we have to experiment with this and practice with this. We can do it. The great news is we don't have to be in an uncertain environment to do it. A lot of us who go to the gym do this in the gym every day anyway. We don't go in the gym and focus on the entire workout. We focus on the muscle we're looking at and maybe the first set. Sometimes we'll do it in the middle of a set. We'll say, we'll say, I want to do 12. We'll do 6, and we'll say, you know what, 6 more. I'm just gonna do 6 more. You'll count 6 again. So all you're doing is you're manipulating these horizons, and you're managing your dopamine. So understanding this level of neurochemistry is really important in accomplishing these goals.
So well explained and therefore accessible. So now I want to move on to another element, and that's this idea of staying cool. And it's just, you just see the language. I know it's you're taking this from, what's the field that you're drawing from?
Neurobiology. Yeah.
Neurobiology.
Yeah.
So staying cool, but it's you're giving us tools to modulate our autonomic arousal, and then and I certainly know because if I'm going to have anything, I can freak myself out and be my heart rate goes through my head, and I'm rendered useless.
Yeah.
So I definitely want to have you talk with us about how we can modulate this arousal.
Well, so one of the things so this is the second part of the equation. So we have uncertainty plus anxiety equals fear. We've talked about buying down uncertainty. The next question is, how do we buy down anxiety? Yeah. All right. First of all, we have to reframe anxiety to what it actually is. Okay. Anxiety is in fact fiction. All right. It's always ahead of us. It's always about what hasn't happened, but we're worried will happen. Whereas the past is history, the future is fiction, anxiety is fiction. Now, the results of anxiety, the stress that is induced by anxiety, is quite present in our system. But one of the things you'll never see Navy SEALs do is worry about stuff they can't control in the moment. Okay. Now that doesn't preclude proper planning. We're always doing proper planning, but we're not over planning. We're not, suffering paralysis through analysis. Planning a couple things, and we're saying, hey, when we get there, we get there, and we'll hit it along the way. But we don't worry about stuff we can't control in the moment. So that's number one. Reframe anxiety to what it actually is, and that's fiction. Now, the next piece is the stress induced from that is quite real and quite present. And that autonomic arousal will, in fact, tip us sometimes, again, in the extreme cases, into autonomic overload where we are just panicked. We don't want that. And so we can, in fact, reverse this physiological process. When we get stressed and we feel that autonomic arousal go up, certain things happen physiologically with our vision and with our respiratory system. Vision, for example, starts to tunnel. We've heard of tunnel vision. We start to focus in on the threat. Yeah. This is by design, so we focus on the threat. One of the ways we can reverse or begin to reverse that process is a tool called panoramic vision, which is basically open gaze. It's a very simple tool. All of us know it. If anybody listening has the opportunity, don't do this if you're driving, but if you have the opportunity to look out in front of you, and if you're looking out in front of you and you're picking a point, stop staring at that point and just kind of soften your gaze. So if you could kind of notice your peripheries. This is called open gaze, used in martial arts and other aspects. This has been known to actually decrease our autonomic arousal because we're reversing the process. Okay, I used to do this when I first started public speaking. As you can imagine, as a Navy SEAL, you don't do a lot of public speaking. So it's not something I really loved. I'd be a little nervous about it. I get on stage, and immediately on stage, I just go into panoramic soft gaze. I wouldn't focus on anything. Begin to calm me down. So that's one of the ways, and I could talk about a couple of different visual tools that you can execute. Respiratory wise, we know our breathing quickens. It gets rapid, more shallow. One of the things we can do, respiratory tools, by the way, are the most powerful. They're even more powerful than visual tools. A lot of breath work out there. I talk about a bunch of different breathing techniques. One of the biggest, most efficacious technique is called the physiological sigh. Okay, physiological sigh is really just when one takes a deep breath in, all the way in, tops it off, and then a nice slow exhale. You can do that 5, 6, 7 times, and you will literally feel yourself calm down. Okay. Now, the cool thing about these breathing techniques, if you're really panicked, is you can actually combine picking horizons or moving horizons with breathing, because your first horizon can be, I'm going to take 5 breaths. Yeah. Right. But like you've mentioned, is that as soon as you're thinking that, as soon as you're making that decision, you're automatically engaging your frontal lobe and you're actually in a decision-making position. Whereas if you're not, then your limbic position, you're acting without thinking. So all of this can be combined in a very unique way and cool way to, in fact, engage that frontal lobe and begin moving more deftly and confidently through any type of situation.
I like that you make that sound so accessible and easy. So I'm gonna work on that, Rich. Thank you very much. Okay, we have to talk a little bit about your attributes attributes. I don't know why I have a hard time saying that word. I was like, I need to read this book. So I was delighted that you included some information in this book about them. So can you introduce us to them?
Absolutely. Attributes are the qualities that allow us to do what we do. They're the quality. They're different from skills. Skills are kind of, you're able to do the thing. Attributes is do you have what it takes to do the thing. Skills are very visible. They're very measurable. Attributes are not. They're kind of innate. They're kind of intangible. But attributes are things like patience, situational awareness, adaptability, humility. These are all attributes, and these attributes actually speak to how and why we perform the way we do. If we were kind of think about an iceberg a picture of an iceberg, and you can see the entire iceberg, right? So it's one of these pictures where you can see the stuff above the surface, you can see below the surface, and we all know that most of the iceberg sits below the surface. That stuff above the surface is the performance, our behavior. That's what everybody else sees. But being informed, that is being informed by stuff beneath the surface. Now, the very first part before you get to the surface is your personality. Okay, personality is made up of a bunch of things. It's made up of values, beliefs, ideology, environment. A bunch of things go into a personality. But beneath even personality, at the very bottom of that iceberg, are attributes. And I know this. We all know this because experientially we've experienced it. When the you-know-what hits the fan, personality goes out the window. We are running at our most raw. And so our attributes define how we run at our most raw. Now, real quick, I talk about 41 attributes. All of us have all 41 of the attributes. The unique part of us is how much of each attribute we have. What order the attributes go in. So we take adaptability, for example. I'm about a level 6, which our Likert scale is 7 to 1, right? So I'm about a 6 on adaptability, which means when the environment changes around me outside of my control, it's fairly easy for me to go with the flow. Someone else might be a level 3. When the same thing happens to them, it's difficult for them to go with the flow. They can still do it. They're still adaptable because all human beings are. There's just more friction there. So if we're going to line up these attributes on a wall like dimmer switches, all of us would have different dimmer switch settings that starts to speak to our own unique performance. I always kind of relate it to automobiles. Every human being, we're all like automobiles. We all have the same components and parts, okay? However, some of us are Jeeps, some of us are SUVs, and some of us are Ferraris. And there's no judgment there because the Jeep can do things the Ferrari can't do, and the Ferrari can do things the Jeep can't do. But it behooves us to kind of lift our hood to figure out what kind of engine we're running with, because the friction in our lives might be because we've been a Jeep trying to run on a Ferrari track or vice versa. So attributes begin to describe for us individually how and why we show up the way we do, and gives us a real clear picture about who we are and how we're going to perform at our most raw, which is really what happens in uncertainty, challenge, and stress.
Oh, that is so alluring. All right. So what I want to do, let's grab our last break. I do want to cover off on identities and objectives, the rest of the two elements of your model, but let's do that after the break.
Yep.
I'm your host, Dr. Alise Cortez. We went on the air with Rich Diviney. He's the founder of the Attributes. We've been talking through his beautiful uncertainties model, which is accessible to you. You can wrap your arms around it and use it. After the break, we'll continue to cover off on the other two elements, and then we're going to talk about how we can use this stuff to build class act high-performance teams. We'll be right back.
Dr. Alise Cortez is a management consultant specializing in meaning and purpose, an inspirational speaker and author. She helps companies visioneer for greater purpose among stakeholders and develop purpose-inspired leadership and meaning-infused cultures that elevate fulfillment, performance, and commitment within the workforce. To learn more or to invite Alise to speak to your organization, please visit her at alisecortez.com. Let's talk about how to get your employees working on purpose. This is Working on Purpose with Dr. Alise Cortez. To reach our program today or to open a conversation with Alise, send an email to Alise, A-L-I-S-E, at alisecortez.com. Now, back to Working on Purpose.
Thanks for staying with us and welcome back to Working on Purpose. I'm your host, Dr. Alise Cortez. As you know by now, this program is dedicated to empowering and inspiring you along your journey to realize more of your potential. If you want to learn more about how we can work together and what's involved with the Gusto Now Academy for leaders and individuals on various journeys alike, make your way to gusto-now.com and then go to the training tab and you can find the academy there. If you are just now joining us, my guest is Rich Diviney. He's the author of Masters of Uncertainty, the Navy SEAL Way to Turn Stress into Success for You and Your Team. So we were going to cover off on the last two elements of your Mastering Uncertainty model. You already touched a little bit on identities when you did the brief, but I really love if you could say a little bit more about that, and I really want you to say more about why the I am statements work so well.
Yeah, I think I am, the two words I am are, I think, the most powerful words in the human language, because anything we put after that is what we identify as, and it shapes our behavior. And what we have to recognize is that we are, in fact, a collection of I ams that we collect over a lifetime. And they can be everything from, benign to pretty big and serious. I mean, I went to this high school, I played this sport. I'm a husband, I'm a father, I'm a Navy SEAL, I'm a Metallica fan. I mean, whatever those are, they are what they are. But every single one of our I ams comes with some rules and conditions and behaviors that describe what it means to be that identity. And what we have to recognize is in uncertainty, challenge, and stress, we are going to behave towards whichever identity we're prioritizing in that moment. Okay. So when I was in combat in Iraq and Afghanistan, of course, my Navy SEAL identity was prioritized. Okay. But sometimes the target would change and we'd have to take care of civilians or women and children, and my husband and father identity would prioritize. We can find ourselves behaving in ways that we actually don't recognize or realize because we're bringing forth an identity that we have but don't recognize what it's doing. So we've seen the negative consequences in these. We've all seen the story where the sports fan, the ultra uber sports fan, beats the crap out of another sports fan. Okay, and they're in front of the judge, and they're like, the judge is like, "What were you thinking?" And the guy's like, "I don't know what I was thinking," because the guy was in fact behaving towards an identity without recognizing it. Now, if that person had invoked and had the wherewithal to invoke some other identities, maybe professional businessman or family man, that behavior would have subsided. But all this to say is our identities are driving us at all times, especially during uncertainty, challenge, stress. We can, again, with our frontal lobe engaged, we can pick and choose which identities should be prioritized in the moment and what's the most useful and what's not the most useful. So really the act of understanding these identities, these I ams, and getting a list going of however many I ams you have, it starts to really illuminate how and why you perform and behave the way you do.
I think that what you just shared there about the maniacal sports fan is really, really compelling. That's so well explained and situated. It makes so much more sense to me now. Okay, so the last element of the model speaks to objectives, and I really like, again, your language is so crisp. You talk about really that's your objectives are your purpose made tangible.
Yeah. It's probably the quickest, most simple one. That is, we can't. Masters of uncertainty don't kind of align themselves to vague purposes. They anchor themselves to concrete objectives. When I was a young man, in my teens and in high school, I wanted to serve my country. I wanted to be a warrior. I wanted to do good. I wanted to be special, and be part of something special and unique. That was a purpose, right? It became anchored when I decided to become a Navy SEAL. Yeah. And an anchored objective is something you can begin to DPO and shift horizons inside of, and start moving towards. So all this to say is we want to make sure we're anchoring ourselves to objectives, because these objectives are also driving us in uncertainty, challenge, and stress.
Fantastic. And that brings us to where I want to get to with how we can use this stuff to really develop dynamite, productive, high-performance teams. And I want to first start by saying that one of the things you say in the book is, you say a key reason that many teams remain stuck in mediocrity is their failure to account for uncertainty. Yeah. So if we can just start by situating, how we can step into the world of building great teams using your framework, your model.
Yeah, well, the reason is because we have teams and we have high-performing teams. A team is simply defined as any group of two or more people working together towards a common goal or objective. That's a team. A high-performing team is any group of two or more people working towards a common goal or objective that perform not only when things are going great, but also when things are not going great. This is the biggest, most distinguishing factor between a regular team and a high-performing team. And so the way we perform when things aren't going great is we have to task organize ourselves in a very specific way, and we have to know things about each other and build trust with each other so that we can, in fact, navigate these times and begin to perform. So the very first and probably most important model is this idea of dynamic subordination. What dynamic subordination is, if you were to think of it as a visual thing, it's not the pyramid, it's not the flat line, it's not even the upside down pyramid. It's kind of a blob. And what dynamic subordination implies is a team understands that challenges and issues can come from any angle at any moment. And when one does, the person who's closest and the most capable immediately steps up and takes lead, and everybody follows and supports. And the environment shifts and someone else steps up. And, I was an officer in the SEAL teams. I went on hundreds of combat missions. I was in charge of every single one. It did not mean I was always being supported. In fact, most of the time it was the opposite. I was supporting other people, whether it was my snipers, my breachers, my assaulters. Sometimes the environment would shift and they'd be in support of me. But all this tells us is something extremely important, that our position on our job on a team has nothing to do with our rank and hierarchy. It has everything to do with what we are there to contribute to a team. And if we are leaders or want to be leaders of a team, it's our responsibility to create that dynamically subordinating environment. One of the ways we do that is we have to understand each other's attributes, because these attributes mesh together very well. The high patience person and the low patience person mesh very well on a team. My wife and I are like this. We've been married 24 years. She's low patience, I'm high patience. Now, when in an environment where patience is required, I step up. In an environment where impatience is required, she steps up. Her impatience has prevented me from sometimes taking too long or procrastinating. My patience has sometimes prevented her from making too quick of a decision or moving too rapidly. So these attributes line up. Then we also have to start building trust. We have to build trust amongst each other, and we have to do that through the way we behave with each other. And we can get into trust, but I'll stop there because I know I've been ranting a little bit. So.
No, it's fantastic. I think that this idea of dynamic subordination in team synergy is an incredible concept. And as somebody who also is out to elevate leaders, I think it's just really, really exciting, powerful, and I see how it really changes the whole outcome in terms of results. And I like how you talk about it's this very fluid transition, keeps the team agile, always putting its best foot forward. That collective expertise comes together, and who's the leader has orchestrated the environment for this to happen. Yeah. And I want to celebrate that is a possibility. In today's world, I see so much still command and control stuff going on, a lot of bureaucracy stuff that's holding organizations back, and the people that are in them that are starving to give their best. So I think that this concept for me, Rich, is really one of the most powerful things that you have in your book in relation to the world of business and teams inside organizations.
Yeah, and it's funny. It came from this idea. Obviously, the military was the background, but in the early days of military maneuvers, it was very I say you do. You had lines that stood across from each other in big open fields, marching forward and shooting each other. And then as certainly the Revolutionary War, the early patriots began to hide and run around and began what eventually would become asymmetric warfare, where there were no lines and the battlefield was blurred in terms of who and where the enemy and the other people were. In those environments, a leader cannot expect to maintain a pyramid style of I say you do, because you don't have visibility on where the primary problem is. And so dynamic subordination allows for an organization to put forth its best foot as close to the problem as possible, and where the nodes are actually there, and then report back. But in uncertainty, what's happening is that node that's forward, that's serving that's being supported, that node is setting the first horizon, and then everybody moves to that. And as soon as that's done, then some new data may present itself, and another node may step forward. But this is how we, as teams, can manipulate and manage uncertainty in a team environment. And we're just making sure everybody is actualized to put their best foot forward. I mean, it's so simple. I mean, if we asked a human being to do everything with your nose and leave every part of our body out, it wouldn't work. I mean, we have every part of our body is fulfilling a role. Our hands, our feet, or whatever, our nose, our eyes, but we have to make sure that we are putting forth the best node and allowing that node to kind of prosper and be supported, and then of course being willing to shift back and be in support when the environment changes.
This just came to me. Obviously, we're talking about many levels beyond this, but there's a strong undercurrent and element that this dynamics in subordination is very much it's like improv.
Yeah.
Right? It which does really still, it also embodies the four key areas that you have to focus on to actually get the thing started, which is in your book. And you already mentioned that you have to build trust, to establish communication, be vulnerable, and then create low risk opportunities for practice. So I would love for you to speak a little bit high level to those, because there's two other things I want to get out of you before we get off air. Yeah. But for us to put dynamic subordination into movement, you need those four pieces.
Yeah, well, I'll go through them real briefly. And trust is such a huge topic. We could spend an hour on trust alone. But obviously, the one thing I want people to understand about trust is about behaviors. In other words, we have to behave and it's reciprocal. Okay, we behave in a certain way to allow someone to trust us. You can't make anybody trust you. All you can do is behave in a way that allows them to form a belief, a decision to trust you. So it's all about us going first. This nonsense about people coming in. So I'll trust them when they prove it to me. No. We have to go first. And every high performing team, we go first with our trust behaviors that allows for people to trust us, and it's reciprocated. So that's trust. Communication has to be abundant and purposeful. And those two words are very, very specific, abundant and purposeful, because for me as a ground force commander, in other words, I'm in charge of the entire mission. To spew every single bit of information I'm getting to the operator who's kicking the door right now is not purposeful. I need to make sure that he has every piece of information he needs in the moment and not overwhelm him. So it's not about giving everybody everything. It's about being purposeful with everything that someone needs to understand, and being abundant with it. And that's how, the information is never siloed. Vulnerability is about wearing everything on our sleeves. My strengths and my weaknesses are all on my sleeves, so my teammates can know exactly when I'm going to be stepping up to support them, and they know exactly when they're going to be stepping up to support me. That's absolutely critical. And by the way, it also builds trust. And then low risk opportunities for practice just means, as teams, first of all, we all have levels of uncertainty every day in our lives with our teams. We can use those, what I call minor little tragedies, to practice this stuff as teams. So when the big stuff hits, we're versed in it. But if we focus on and start to highlight some of these lower risk things that happen every day on a daily or weekly basis, we can then think about how we're behaving as a team and begin to actually get better and better at it.
Yeah, and then it sort of takes into account and puts into motion a previous topic we had on this podcast, which is about now we've set momentum in place, right?
Yeah.
So you've really started to activate momentum. Okay, so we're coming to a close here. I want to finish up here with this idea that one of the things that you said is that in order for this to work, in order for us to be able to situate this idea of dynamic subordination, we have to be able to live in that space of vulnerability such that we know the whole team's, their strengths and their weaknesses, and that you as the leader especially have to really model vulnerability and go first. So if we could finish this part of the conversation with sharing a bit about just the power of vulnerability and why it's so important.
Well, yes, and I will just start. First of all, let me just start by saying leaders, there's a difference between being in charge and being a leader. Okay, one is a position, one is a behavior. Yeah. And we don't get to self-designate. We don't get to call ourselves leaders. That's like calling yourself good-looking or funny. Okay, other people decide whether or not you are someone they want to follow based on the way you behave. I had sometimes some cases in the military. There'd be someone in a hierarchical position above me, and I'd look at that person and I'd say, I wouldn't follow that person anywhere. Meanwhile, there'd be someone over here to my right who had no hierarchical position whatsoever. I'd be like, I would follow that person to hell and back. And it's because of the way we behave. So if we want to be leaders, we have to behave like leaders. And part of the thing we have to do is we have to first model the behavior we want to see more of, and then reward the behavior we want to see more of. So we have to go first. That's being vulnerable. We go first. If we want more empathy in our team, we have to show empathy, and we have to reward empathy. If we want more, whatever, you name it. And so all of this has to do with modeling and rewarding and being vulnerable that way. And that way we can set an example of how to behave in a team. And if there's one message for any of us, and by the way, in the dynamic subordination environment, everybody has a chance to be a leader, depending on and we as the people in charge, as the leaders we want to be, have to set that stage. We have to make sure everybody is empowered and feels ready to step up, because if we don't do that, they're going to be looking back for decisions, and that's
excellent point. Well, it goes by so fast, Rich. You've been a delight to talk with. I want to give you the chance to close the conversation with how you like. What would you like to leave our listeners and viewers with around the world?
All I will say is this. The reason why this stuff drives me is twofold. First, it will allow people to deal with uncertainty when it happens inevitably, and we don't predict it. That always happens. We're always going to have uncertainty happens without warning. We want to be able to step more confidently into it. But more important, the more exciting thing for me is if you get really good at this, you begin to deliberately step into uncertainty. And that is where all of our growth, all of our evolution, all of our discovery lies. And so we as human beings can have a really wonderful, energetic, rich life. And we can explore our potential constantly if we just understand how we can more effectively, deliberately step into uncertainty out of our comfort zone. That's where our potential is.
Fantastic way to finish, Rich. I am so grateful to know you, that you've stepped into my path. I got to read your book, to be educated by it, to be inspired by it. I'm here sharing with my listeners around the globe. Thank you for being on the program.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Listeners and viewers, you are going to want to learn more about Rich Diviney, the work he does at The Attributes, and is speaking in his latest book. Visit theattributes.com. Let me spell that for you. So the attributes is ATTRIBUTES, theattributes.com. Last week, if you missed the live show, you can always catch it via recorded podcast. We were on air with Melissa Swift, the author of Work Here Now, Think Like a Human and Build a Powerhouse Workplace. She really helped us give us language and thus capacity to better understand the aspects of where work is not working for people and what organizations can do to address the issue of today's times. Next week, we'll be on air with Mitchell Levy, talking about the work he's doing to help leaders formulate how they first execute their purpose and then execute abundance. See you then, and together, let's lean in and learn together how to make workplaces that work for everyone and find ways to do business in a way that betters the world. Let's work on purpose.
We hope you've enjoyed this week's program. Be sure to tune into Working on Purpose, featuring your host, Dr. Alise Cortez, each week on W4CY. Together, we'll create a world where business operates conscientiously, leadership inspires impassioned performance, and employees are fulfilled in work that provides the meaning and purpose they crave. See you there. Let's work on purpose.